What is happening, baby? Welcome back to the Huddle Chat Sports Network's very own Fantasy Football Huddle, presented, as always, by DanklyfeBrand. Let's talk sports and shank it golf brand. Today we're going to be getting into our stardoms and situms in the ever so important Week 13 as we make our playoff pushes going into weeks 14 and in the playoffs in 15, 16, and 17. But right now we got the oh so important Week 13. 6 teams on a bye this week, so the stardom and situms list I'm assuming is going to be pretty important this week. I know I've had to do a ton of research myself for my own leagues, whether I've locked up a playoff berth or not. Everything is still very important. In the leagues I've locked up a playoff berth, I'm fighting for that first round bye so I can have an easier path to that championship and to that money at the end of the year. And in the leagues that I haven't been locked in a playoff position, I haven't been eliminated from playoff contention either, and we're fighting tooth and nail to get in every aspect of the word. And I'm sure 98% of y'all that are watching this are the exact same way. So without further ado, let's get into the Week 13 stardoms and situms, Part 1, quarterbacks, tight ends, and defenses. So fill up your cup, roll something up, and let's get right into the stardoms and situms this week. We got a couple of quarterbacks that have been on this list for the past few weeks that are now kind of getting into must-start territory. You're looking at Dak Prescott playing the Seahawks on Thursday night, and then you got Tua Tagovailoa against the Washington Commanders. Both have entered must-start territory. Both have good matchups this week, so I'm feeling fantastic about Dak and Tua. Another quarterback getting damn near into must-start category is CJ Stroud playing the Denver Broncos. He's been an absolute beast in the stat sheets in the past few weeks, and it showed even last week, particularly putting up 30 points in a loss to the Jaguars. He should still remain in starting lineups against this weak-ass Denver Broncos defense. They've given up 17-plus points to 3 quarterbacks on the road this season, and they have 6 teams on the bye, so you're looking at CJ Stroud, like I said, probably going to be a must-start category this season for the remainder of the season, but particularly this week with missing those 6 teams. Getting on to those kind of questionable players, looking at Brock Purdy against the Eagles. He was kind of disappointing last week. He only put up 10.5 points on Thanksgiving week against Seattle, but I do like him to rebound. And what seems to be game of the year against the Eagles, their defense has struggled to contain quarterbacks this season, allowing 19-plus points to quarterbacks 6 times this season, including 4 quarterbacks that have put up more than 28 points against them. Purdy's going to be a top 10 option most likely this week, so I'm starting Brock Purdy. I'm also starting Russell Wilson against the Texans. His numbers have not been great in the last few weeks, but he still hasn't been a disappointment. He's giving fantasy managers a decent floor. I like his ceiling a lot this week and think that Russell Wilson is a low-end quarterback 1 this week. He faces a veteran Texan defense that's allowing an average of almost 300 yards passing per game and over 21 points per game as well in a fantasy football aspect over the last 4 weeks in particular. And so I'm looking at Russell Wilson to be an absolute amazing bye week replacement, getting you into those playoffs. A couple of other quarterbacks I'm looking to start: Jared Goff against the Saints, Sam Howell against the Dolphins, and Trevor Lawrence against the Bengals. Now, I do have a viewer question I want to get into. Khalil Johns on Facebook asks, he's got a quarterback on bye this week, 10-2. He's looking to start either Geno Smith, Matthew Stafford, or Gardner Minshew. To be honest with you, I'm going Gardner Minshew against the Titans. The Titans are a weak team, a weak defense, and Gardner Minshew presents a nice, safe floor for me and could even have a decent game if he can toss 2 or 3 touchdowns. I do have Matthew Stafford as my sit of the week, and I also have Geno Smith on my sit-em list as well. So let's get into that. But the answer for you, Khalil, is going to be Gardner Minshew from those 3 that you've given me there. So everybody, make sure you like and subscribe to the channel. If you're new to the channel, subscribe to it. If you like the content, like the channel. And never be afraid to ask those questions. I love answering those questions and try everything I can to get you guys featured on the videos when you ask those questions. A couple of y'all ask questions every week, and I still get you up there every week. So never be afraid to ask those questions down in the comments over on our Facebook or on our Twitter, which you can see up at the top of the video. I think it's this side. Maybe it's this side. But up at the top of the video, you'll see at the Huddle Chat on Facebook, on Twitter. You can also check us on YouTube. Comment the videos below. Either way, let's get into the sit-ems of the week. Like I said, Matt Stafford's going to be my sit-em of the week at quarterback. Matt Stafford had his best game of the season last week, tossed 4 touchdown passes in a win, and he's going to have a much tougher task this week, which is why I'm going to be sitting him. He's playing that Cleveland Browns defense, which, believe it or not, seems to be the best defense in the league, especially against quarterbacks. Only 2 quarterbacks have beaten them for more than 16 points, and they both rushed for 2 touchdowns during those games. So I'm staying away from Matt Stafford this week, and I'm also staying away from Geno Smith, as you know, against the Dallas Cowboys on Thursday night. He's been a shell of himself, and as I've been loving to say, he is who we thought he was. He's back to being Geno Smith. He scored fewer than 16 points in all but 2 games this season. He should definitely be on the sidelines against this really good Cowboys defense. They're only allowing an average of 11 points to quarterbacks this season. Stay away from Geno. I'm also staying away from the lover boy, Jordan Love, against the Chiefs. He's on a hot streak. He's put up 20 plus points in the last 2 games. It's going to be hard to repeat against this Chiefs defense, even though he has a bad matchup. Their defense has been tough all year long, which is not normally what the Chiefs like to do. And they're only allowing an average of 12.3 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks this season. So unless you're in a super flex league or really extremely desperate because of the buys, stay away from Jordan Love. Leave him on the waiver wire if he's out there, or just leave him on your bench. I'm also staying away from Baker Mayfield. He's seen his totals drop in recent weeks. He's become a quarterback that you could kind of rely on in those bye weeks, in those weeks where you needed a streaming option. I'm not streaming Baker Mayfield this week. He scored a combined 23 points over his last 2 games. Definitely going to not want to start him against this Panthers defense that's been tough on quarterbacks. Only 2 quarterbacks, Jared Goff and Tua, have beaten them for more than 16 points this season. At best, Baker Mayfield is a low-end super flex option for you. So stay away from Baker Mayfield and stay away from Derek Carr against the Lions. He has a great matchup this week against the Lions, so you might want to take a chance on him. But the question is going to be who he's throwing to. You're looking at Michael Thomas on the injured list. Chris Olave has a concussion, and Rashid Shaheed has a thigh injury. So you're looking at his 3 main wide receivers potentially going to be out this game. A paper-thin set of options for him, Alvin Kamara, and a bunch of practice squad signups, unless somebody miraculously gets healthy this week. And even then, they're probably going to be a shell of them former selves. So just stay away from Derek Carr. It's not worth the risk this week. I'm also staying away from Kenny Pickett, Bryce Young, and Desmond Ridder, but I didn't need to tell you that. I don't think you were thinking about starting those either. So stay away from those. Let's move on into the tight ends this week. Tight ends we typically go through pretty quickly. Tight ends are pretty hard to pick on this year. You've been relying on a lot of tight ends that haven't been coming through for you. And a lot of those tight ends like Dalton Schultz and Jake Ferguson have been going off. Dalton Schultz, Hunter Henry being some of the most reliable tight ends of the year. So the start of the week for me, we're going back on the David Njoku train, man. I'm going to get back on David Njoku. I'm starting him. He's my start of the week. He's been one of the most consistent tight ends this season, and especially over the last few weeks. He scored 10 plus point in 6 straight games, including one with more than 17 points this season. He's been targeted heavily over the past few weeks, and he's seeing 24 chances over the past 2 games combined. Njoku has a great matchup against the Rams that's allowed the 6th most PPR points per game to tight ends. David Njoku is expected to get peppered with targets this week. No matter who's playing quarterback, I'm staying David Njoku as a safety blanket. I'm also going to start Evan Ingram against the Bengals. Evan Ingram, he was a reliable tight end at the beginning, then kind of fell off. We're back on the Evan Ingram train. He scored a decent line last week. He had 5 catches, 49 yards. I'm keeping him in lineups as he faces a Bengals defense that just last week allowed 120 yards and 21 fantasy points to the returning Pat Freiermuth from injury against the Steelers. Overall, their defense has allowed the 2nd most points per game to tight end, so I'm definitely plugging Evan Ingram in my lineup with confidence. Also, the aforementioned Dalton Schultz against the Broncos has got to be started in my lineup. Dalton Schultz had a terrible game last week, an absolute stinker, just 1.2 points on a season low 29 snaps. He was not very involved in the game at all last week, but he's still a viable starter with a very good matchup against a Denver defense that's allowed 6 touchdowns, the 4th highest catch rate, and the most points per game to tight ends this season. So Dalton Schultz is in a perfect spot to have a rebound game. And I'm also going to be starting Taysom Hill against the Lions. As we said earlier in the episode, the Saints are going to be missing a ton of their targets. Taysom Hill hasn't been seeing huge fantasy lines in the games that he's not heavily involved in, but I think that he's going to be heavily involved in this game. You see him play at tight end, at wide receiver, at quarterback. This is the kind of game where Taysom Hill gets some action. So I'm liking Taysom Hill this week. This could be a shootout where Taysom Hill might even mess around and score 2 touchdowns this season. I also like Juwan Johnson from the Saints. Juwan Johnson and Taysom Hill both are startable options for you at tight end this week. I'm also going to be starting Pat Freiermuth, Logan Thomas, and Tyler Conklin. Sitting tight ends, I'm sitting Tyler Higbee. I know it's going to be hard to sit Higbee after watching what he did last week. He had a huge game against the Cowboys last week, or against the Cardinals last week. And he had 2 touchdowns, 19.9 points. He had a crazy good game. And that's more points than he scored in the last 5 weeks combined. He went off last week, and it's going to be hard to sit him. I know you want to, but do not sit him this week. That Browns defense makes him just hard to start, man. They do not allow tight ends to score a lot of points, and Tyler Higbee has not really been reliable this season. He had 1 explosion game. I think it's bait. I'm also sitting Gerald Everett, who also had a good week last week, returning from injury and scoring those 14.3 points. But I'm not going to chase those points this week against the New England Patriots. They've been tough on tight ends. In fact, their defense has allowed only 1 touchdown this season and the 3rd fewest points per game to tight ends in a fantasy football aspect. So I'm not going to be starting Gerald Everett this week. I'm also getting away from Cade Otton against the Panthers. He was a hot ad off the waiver wires. I've been talking about him for the last few weeks, but that Panthers defense has not allowed many tight ends to score. They've only allowed 3 touchdowns to the tight end position and the 6th fewest points to tight end this season. Stay away from Cade Otton. I'm also staying away from Tucker Kraft against the Chiefs, Kyle Pitts against the Jets, as well as Hunter Henry versus the Chargers, and Chigo Okonkwo versus the Colts. That's going to do it for my tight ends today. Let's go ahead and wrap things up with the kickers, or the defenses actually, that I like the most going into week 13. As always, we're going to go nice and quick through these defenses. We're going to be starting the Dolphins defense against the Commanders. We're going to be starting the Chargers defense against the New England Patriots. We're going to be starting the Jets against the Falcons. We're going to be starting the Steelers defense against the Cardinals, and the Rams defense against the Browns. We're going to be starting or sitting the Eagles defense against the 49ers, the Saints defense versus the Lions. Stay away from the Broncos defense against the Houston Texans. Stay away from the Patriots against the Chargers, and do not start the Packers versus the Chiefs. That's going to do it for part 1 of our Week 13 Stardoms and Situms. Let's go ahead and get things wrapped up right for you today. Make sure you tune into part 2, which is going to contain the running backs, wide receivers, kickers, and a few more fantasy football fan questions. And then, of course, our Sunday episode is always live during pregame, which is going to be 9:30 Mountain Standard Time, 11:30 Eastern Standard Time. We got our trade episode coming back out for the end of the week this week to end off your season of trades in fantasy football, as well as a couple players to stash as you round off the end of your season. Thank y'all so much for tuning in to today's episode. That's going to do it for me today. As always, keep your chin all the way up, but your attitude all the way down. I'll see you next time. Peace out.